I was standing in my bridal robe while my bridesmaids helped pin my veil when my phone buzzed on the vanity table. I assumed it was a vendor confirming a delivery time or my mother asking which entrance to use at the venue. I picked it up without thinking. The email was from Blake Whitmore. Asterisk, effective immediately, your position at Whitmore Construction is terminated. Consider it my wedding gift to you. Asterisk. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, standing completely still while the room moved around me. Curling irons, perfume bottles, someone laughing at something on their phone in the corner. I read it out loud. The laughter stopped. 20 minutes later, a follow-up message arrived from the same address. Asterisk, hope the honeymoon plans didn't depend on your paycheck. Asterisk. I was still standing there, veil half pinned, trying to locate a response somewhere inside myself, when my phone rang. The screen said, Mr. Whitmore. Blake's father. I stepped out of the bridal suite into the narrow hallway and answered the call. The building smelled like fresh flowers and floor wax. Through the window at the end of the hall, I could see the venue's garden being set up. White chairs arranged in careful rows, a string quartet doing a sound check near the archway. Mr. Whitmore's voice was tight in a way I had never heard from him before. He was a measured man by nature. Whatever he was feeling had pushed past his usual composure. Vivian, he said. I just saw the termination notice my son sent you. My chest tightened. I waited. I didn't authorize it. A pause. And I need to ask you something very important before I do anything else. I leaned against the wall, still holding my veil in my free hand, and told him to go ahead. Whatever was coming next, I already understood that this day was not going to go the way I had planned it. To understand why that phone call mattered so much, you need to understand what the 3 months before my wedding actually looked like. I had worked at Whitmore Construction for 6 years. My title was Senior Project Coordinator, which was a modest name for a role that touched nearly every major project the company ran. Permitting, compliance documentation, engineering report coordination, vendor contract management. I was the person who made sure the technical and regulatory pieces of large construction projects arrived in the right place at the right time. I was good at it. Not in a way I talked about, in a way the results confirmed quietly, project after project, year after year. Then, 3 months before my wedding, Blake Whitmore walked into the building. He was 28 years old. He had a business degree, a confident handshake, and a title that had been created specifically for him, Director of Operations. He walked through the office on his first day like a man arriving somewhere he already owned. In a sense, he was right. But ownership and understanding are very different things. Blake's first official act as Director of Operations was to review the department's active project files. I had prepared a detailed safety compliance plan for a residential development on the east side of the city. It had taken me 3 weeks to build, cross-referencing municipal codes, coordinating with the engineering team, aligning the timeline with permit submission windows. It was thorough, legally sound, and ready to submit. Blake called a meeting to review it. He flipped through the document for approximately 4 minutes before setting it down. Too expensive, he said. Cut the third-party safety inspections. I explained, as clearly as I could without sounding condescending, that the inspections were not optional. They were required under the city's current construction ordinance. Skipping them would trigger a compliance violation that could halt the entire project. He leaned back in his chair and smiled the way people smile when they've decided that listening carefully is beneath them. Relax, Vivian. Nobody's checking that closely. I looked at him across the table and felt the first cold current of something I didn't yet have a name for. 2 weeks after Blake arrived, the CEO held a department review meeting with the senior leadership team. He opened by congratulating Blake on the progress reports coming out of the operations division. He mentioned specifically the East Side development timeline and the updated city redevelopment proposal, calling them examples of sharp, proactive thinking. Blake sat at the head of the table and accepted the praise with the ease of someone who had been receiving credit for other people's work their entire life. Every word the CEO said was about work I had done. The progress reports were mine. The updated proposal framework was mine. I had spent 3 late nights the previous week reorganizing the submission timeline. After the meeting, A colleague named Priya fell into step beside me in the hallway. She kept her voice low. "You know he's been forwarding your reports under his name," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded once and kept walking. I had already started keeping records. Over the following weeks, Blake established a pattern that was both predictable and deliberate. In meetings, he would interrupt my presentations mid-sentence to reframe what I had just said as his own conclusion. He would correct minor details publicly, always in front of others, always in a tone that suggested I had misunderstood something basic. Once, during a vendor coordination call with 4 people on the line, he said casually, "Maybe large-scale project management is a bit outside your wheelhouse, Vivian." Nobody on that call said anything. I finished the call, documented the conversation in my personal notes, and went back to work. The strange contradiction was that even as he undermined me publicly, Blake continued relying on me completely for every critical deliverable. The compliance packages, the permit applications, the engineering coordination logs. He presented them all as his own, but not a single one existed without my work underneath it. He needed me and resented needing me in equal measure. That combination, I had learned, was the most dangerous kind of insecurity to work around. The project that mattered most, the one that everything else was building toward, was a $40 million municipal redevelopment contract the city had put out for bid. Whitmore Construction had been positioning for this contract for over a year before Blake arrived. It was the largest single project in the company's recent history, and winning it would set the division's direction for the next 3 years. I had been the primary coordinator on the bid preparation for 6 months. The compliance documentation alone was a substantial undertaking: zoning approvals, environmental impact assessments, engineering certifications, permit applications across 3 overlapping regulatory frameworks. Blake had attended exactly 2 of the 12 working sessions I had run on the project. He had contributed nothing substantive to either. But his name was on the cover page of the submission package. I understood why Mr. Whitmore had put his son in a visible role on the company's biggest active bid. What I also understood, with increasing clarity, was that Blake had no functional knowledge of what was inside those documents. If anything went wrong, if anyone asked detailed questions, he would have nothing. About 3 weeks before my wedding, I stayed late to finish the final compliance submission package for the municipal bid. The office was quiet. Most of the floor had cleared out by 7. I was at my desk with 3 reference documents open and the submission checklist running down the side of my screen, working through the final cross-verification pass that would confirm everything was complete and correctly formatted before we filed. Blake came through on his way out. He stopped at the edge of my desk. "You worked too hard," he said. There was something in his tone that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite mockery. It sat in the space between them. Then he added, quietly, like something he was almost thinking out loud, "People who make themselves indispensable have a way of making themselves disposable too." He left before I could respond. I sat with that sentence for a long moment after the elevator doors closed. Then I saved my work, backed it up to my personal drive the way I always did, and finished the checklist. I did not sleep well that night, but I kept working. The bid was too important to let anything else interfere. Standing in the hallway outside the bridal suite with my veil still in my hand, I listened to Mr. Whitmore ask me his question. "Vivian," he said carefully, "are you the person who prepared the city's compliance documentation for the municipal redevelopment bid?" Something in the way he asked it, the specific, deliberate phrasing, told me this was not a general question. "Yes," I said. "All of it." He exhaled slowly. It was the exhale of someone who has just confirmed something they hoped wasn't true. "Then we have a serious problem," he said. Through the window at the end of the hall, I could see guests beginning to arrive in the garden. The string quartet had started playing something soft and unhurried. My bridesmaids were probably wondering where I had gone. I pressed the phone closer to my ear and asked him to explain. What he told me next made the termination email feel like the smallest part of the story. Mr. Whitmore told me that the city's project office had contacted him that morning, the same morning as my wedding. They had scheduled the formal compliance review meeting for the following week, and as a standard pre-meeting check, they had requested confirmation that all submitted documents were on file in their system. Several were missing. Specifically, the Environmental Assessment Addendum, 2 of the engineering certification packages, and the amended zoning variance approval documents that I had prepared and that Blake had confirmed were submitted as part of the final package. They had not been submitted. The files Blake claimed to have filed did not exist in the city's record system. The review meeting was 7 days away. Without those documents, Whitmore Construction's bid would be disqualified. A $40 million contract, 6 months of preparation, and the company's most significant active opportunity, all of it sitting on the edge of collapse because Blake had either forgotten to file the documents or had never understood which ones needed to be filed in the first place. Mr. Whitmore's voice, when he finished explaining, was very quiet. Later that afternoon, between the ceremony and the reception, a message arrived from Priya. She had seen Blake make his announcement to the office that morning, apparently within an hour of sending my termination email. He had gathered the operations team and told them I had been let go due to performance issues. He cited vague concerns about my reliability and said the department would be moving in a new direction under consolidated leadership. Then he had assigned himself as the direct manager over my entire project portfolio. Priya had screenshotted the internal message thread and sent it to me without comment. I read it at the table during the cocktail hour, my husband's hand on my arm, and understood what Blake had been doing. He hadn't fired me because I was underperforming. He had fired me because the bid was nearly complete and he believed, incorrectly as it turned out, that the hard work was finished. He had waited until the project was almost done, until he thought he could claim the result without me present to contradict the story, and then removed me from the equation. What he hadn't accounted for was the missing files. Mr. Whitmore called again that evening. I was at the reception when my phone vibrated in my small clutch bag. I excused myself from the table and stepped outside onto the venue's side terrace. The garden lights were on. I could hear music and laughter through the glass doors behind me. He asked if I would consider coming back on Monday to help address the compliance filing gaps before the city review. He offered to restore my position and said we could discuss terms when I returned. I looked through the glass at the room full of people who had come to celebrate what was supposed to be the beginning of something new. I looked at my husband laughing at the table, talking to my father. I thought about Blake's email, the wording of it, the timing of it. Consider it my wedding gift. Mr. Whitmore, I said, I appreciate you calling. I genuinely do. But your son made that decision this morning. I think I need to honor it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he understood. And I believed him. 2 days into my honeymoon, a message arrived from a development firm I had heard of but never worked with, Crestline Partners, one of Whitmore Construction's main competitors in the municipal project space. They had seen the industry notification that I was no longer with Whitmore. Someone who knew my work had passed my name along, though they didn't say who. They asked if I would be open to a conversation. I told my husband over breakfast on our 3rd morning away. He set down his coffee and looked at me carefully. What do you want to do? He asked. I thought about it for a moment. Not about Blake. Not about Mr. Whitmore. About the 6 years of work I had done and the specific skills those years had built. I want to take the call, I said. The video interview happened on the 4th day of our honeymoon. I sat on the hotel room balcony with the ocean behind me and talked for 90 minutes with Crestline's Director of Development about municipal compliance frameworks, bid coordination strategy, and large-scale permit management. By the end of the call, it was clear we were no longer just having a conversation. While I was still on my honeymoon, the situation at Whitmore Construction was deteriorating. Priya kept me informed in brief daily messages. Blake had attempted to lead the preliminary city meeting himself, the one Mr. Whitmore had mentioned, designed to confirm the compliance package before the formal review. Within the first 20 minutes, city officials had asked for the Environmental Assessment Addendum and the amended zoning variance approval. Blake had brought a folder of documents to the meeting, but the specific files they requested were not in it. He had not known they were missing because he had never personally handled them. He had assumed they were filed because he had been told they were filed. He could not explain the discrepancy. He could not produce the documents. He could not answer the follow-up questions the officials asked about the filing timeline. The meeting ended early. The city's project office issued a formal notice requesting full compliance package verification within 5 business days, or the bid would be placed under administrative review. 5 business days. The messages from Priya during that period painted a picture I recognized from the outside in a way I had only previously experienced from the inside. The engineers on the municipal project had stopped moving forward on their preparatory work because several approvals they needed to reference were among the missing documents. Without confirmed approval status, they couldn't finalize their technical submissions, and without those submissions, the overall package remained incomplete. 2 of the primary vendors had received a revised contract draft from Blake that contained terms inconsistent with what they had originally agreed to. Both had responded by requesting a hold on their commitments until the discrepancies were resolved. Blake apparently hadn't realized the original terms had been negotiated over several months of careful relationship management that he had no knowledge of. Priya described the operations floor as quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that comes not from calm but from people keeping their heads down and waiting. Blake, according to her, had stopped taking questions from the team directly and had started routing everything through a junior assistant who had started the job 2 weeks earlier. The assistant didn't know the answers either. Mr. Whitmore began reviewing internal records himself. I learned this from Priya, who had heard it from the executive assistant on the senior floor. He had requested access to the operations division's project file history going back 18 months and had spent 2 full days working through it with the company's internal counsel. What he found confirmed what many people in the building had already understood privately. The reports, frameworks, and compliance structures that had been presented to clients and executives under Blake's name, the work that had formed the basis of Blake's performance narrative over the past 3 months, had been built almost entirely by me. My name appeared in file metadata. My formatting was visible throughout. Email trails showed documents passing through my account for completion and revision before they were submitted or presented. Blake had not misrepresented small contributions. He had misrepresented entire bodies of work as his own, repeatedly and systematically, over the full course of his time at the company. Mr. Whitmore, by all accounts, sat with that discovery for a long time before doing anything else. The second thing Mr. Whitmore found was worse. While reviewing the budget projections Blake had submitted to the board over the past 3 months, the internal counsel flagged a series of discrepancies between the figures Blake had presented and the underlying financial data in the company's accounting system. Blake had been adjusting the numbers. Not dramatically, carefully enough that a surface review would miss it. But the adjustments were consistent and directional. Projects he had overseen directly showed inflated efficiency gains. Cost overruns had been redistributed across departmental budgets in ways that obscured their origin. The financial picture he had been presenting to his father and the board was meaningfully different from the actual picture. The discrepancies, when fully compiled, totaled several $1 million across the adjusted projections. This was no longer a story about a son taking credit for an employee's work. It had become something that required the company's attorneys to be involved and potentially external auditors. The city review deadline was still approaching, and the compliance files were still missing. When I returned from my honeymoon and officially joined Crestline Partners, I discovered something that made the full shape of the situation clear for the first time. Crestline was preparing a competing proposal for the same municipal redevelopment contract. They had been developing their own bid for 4 months, but they had hit significant obstacles in the compliance framework, specifically around the zoning variance requirements and the environmental assessment structure, which were unusually complex for this particular project due to the site's mixed-use history. These were the exact areas I had spent 6 months navigating at Whitmore. The development director, a direct and practical woman named Beatrice Okafor, laid it out plainly in our first full team meeting. We brought you in because we believe you understand this project's regulatory architecture better than anyone currently working on it. We want you to lead our submission. I looked around the table at the team, experienced, organized, clearly prepared to do the work properly. I can do that, I said. I started the following Monday. When news reached Blake that I had joined Crestline Partners, his response was immediate and disproportionate. He contacted Whitmore Construction's legal team and claimed that I had taken confidential company documents with me, proprietary compliance frameworks, internal project strategies, and client relationship data that he alleged I was now using to build a competing bid. The accusation traveled quickly through the industry's small professional network. Priya forwarded me the internal email in which Blake made the claim to his father and the board, framing it as a serious breach that justified my termination and potentially exposed me to legal liability. I was not alarmed by this, because the accusation was not true. Every document I had used in my work at Crestline had been built from public regulatory sources, my own professional methodology, and industry-standard compliance frameworks. The work I had done at Whitmore was my own in terms of its intellectual and technical development. I had taken nothing from their systems. I forwarded Blake's email to Beatrice, who forwarded it to Crestline's legal team. Whitmore Construction's lawyers reviewed Blake's accusations with the same thoroughness they were simultaneously applying to the budget discrepancy investigation. Their conclusion regarding the alleged document theft was straightforward. The compliance frameworks I had used at Crestline were based on publicly available municipal codes, standard industry methodology, and my own professional expertise, none of which were proprietary to Whitmore Construction. The specific documents I had created while employed there remained in Whitmore's systems. I had not removed, copied, or transferred any file from their network. Blake had no case. The legal team communicated this conclusion to Mr. Whitmore in writing. They also noted, carefully, that pursuing the claim publicly would likely draw more attention to the internal budget investigation than the company would want at that particular moment. Blake's accusation disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. What did not disappear was the city's deadline, now 3 days away, and a compliance package that was still incomplete. Whitmore Construction had not found anyone who could reconstruct the missing documents in time. The city scheduled a formal public review hearing for both competing bids. Each company would present their full proposal to a panel of city officials and technical reviewers. The presentations would be assessed on completeness of compliance documentation, technical credibility, timeline feasibility, and overall alignment with the project's municipal objectives. A decision would be announced within 30 days of the hearing. Whitmore Construction would present first, followed by Crestline Partners. I learned about the hearing schedule from Beatrice, who had received the official notification from the city's project office. She called me into her office, closed the door, and looked at me with the level, direct expression of someone who wants to confirm they understand the full situation. "You built the original Whitmore submission," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. And you've built ours." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Then you're going to be presenting work you know better than anyone in either room," she said. "That's both your advantage and your responsibility. Make sure every piece is airtight." I went back to my desk and worked through the weekend. The hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in the city's main council chamber. It was a formal room. High ceilings, long tables, panel members seated on an elevated platform at the front. Several city officials I recognized from my years of compliance work were present, along with technical reviewers and 2 members of the Municipal Planning Board. Blake presented for Whitmore Construction. He had prepared slides. He spoke with the surface confidence he always carried in rooms where he believed appearance could substitute for substance. For the first 10 minutes, he covered project overview and company background, which required nothing from the compliance files. Then the questions began. The panel's technical reviewer asked for the Environmental Assessment Addendum Reference Number. Blake looked at his folder. He asked for the amended zoning variance approval documentation. Blake looked at his laptop. He asked Blake to walk the panel through the permit submission timeline for the 3 overlapping regulatory frameworks on the site. Blake looked up from his materials and said he would need to follow up in writing. The panel moved on. Their expressions said everything their words did not. When it was Crestline's turn, I stood at the front of the room with our full submission package loaded and organized. I walked the panel through the compliance architecture from the ground up, the environmental assessment framework, the engineering certification sequence, the zoning variance process, the permit timeline across all 3 regulatory frameworks. I answered every question directly and completely, citing specific document references, filing dates, and regulatory code sections without consulting notes. About 40 minutes in, the same technical reviewer who had questioned Blake leaned forward. "These compliance structures," he said, looking between the documents on his desk and the screen behind me, "are very similar in their organization to elements of the original Whitmore submission. I held his gaze steadily. That's because I prepared the original Whitmore submission, I said. I spent 6 months building that compliance architecture. When I joined Crestline, I rebuilt the framework from the same regulatory foundation using my own methodology. The room was quiet for a moment. Several panel members exchanged glances. Thank you for clarifying that, the reviewer said. The city announced their decision 4 weeks after the hearing. The municipal redevelopment contract, valued at $40 million, was awarded to Crestline Partners. The decision cited the completeness and technical credibility of the compliance documentation, the clarity of the permit coordination timeline, and the demonstrated regulatory expertise of the project leadership team. Whitmore Construction's bid was formally declined. The official language noted incomplete compliance filing and insufficient documentation to support the proposed timeline. I read the announcement at my desk at Crestline on a Thursday afternoon. Beatrice appeared in my doorway shortly after, and we acknowledged the moment in the quiet, professional way of people who had worked hard for something and were more relieved than triumphant. The following week, Priya sent me a message. Blake's name had been removed from Whitmore Construction's leadership page. No announcement. No farewell email to the staff. His photo and biography simply disappeared from the company's website one morning, as quietly as possible given the circumstances. The budget investigation, she said, was ongoing. About a month after the contract announcement, Mr. Whitmore called me for the last time. I was at my desk reviewing the preliminary site coordination schedule when his name appeared on my screen. I stepped into the small conference room at the end of the hall and answered. He sounded older than I remembered. Not frail, just worn in the way that certain kinds of disappointment wear on a person when they've worked their whole life to build something and watch someone they love nearly destroy it. Vivian, he said. I should have listened to my employees about my son a long time ago. I didn't respond to that directly. There wasn't a response that would have helped either of us. You deserved better than what happened, he said. I want you to know I understand that now. I thanked him for saying so. And I meant it, not because I needed his acknowledgement, but because it was true and it cost him something to say it. After the call, I sat for a moment in the quiet of that small room. I thought about a wedding morning, a buzzing phone, and a message designed to humiliate. I thought about a hallway outside a bridal suite, a veil in my hand, and a call that had changed the shape of everything that followed. Blake had tried to end something on the worst possible day. What he had actually done was make space for something better. The skills he tried to erase had built exactly the future he had tried to take from me. And that, in the end, was the only answer that mattered.